Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Game podcast. I'm your host, Joe Burridge, and with me today is Ido Naim. Welcome to the podcast, Ido.
Thanks for having me.
It's great. And for our listeners who don't know who you are, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
So I'm Ido, currently living in London, the UK, originally from Israel, spent the bigger time of my life there, grew up just south of Tel Aviv, and after high school, got to the army, where I found myself in the intelligence corps, which was a very educating experience, very fun. And we might talk about it also a bit in the future, but I think very similar to gaming. And after the army, after 6 years of spending there, I found myself getting into gaming, and I've stayed in the gaming industry ever since. Gaming took me abroad with quite a few relocations. So I've lived in Canada, lived in France, and now I'm living in the UK. And I worked for some of the bigger, most interesting companies in the industry, like Playtika, Voodoo, Tripledot Studios, and most recently I joined Zynga, and I started working for Gram Games, which is its subsidiary. Yeah, having good and fun time in the industry and meeting great people like yourself.
Yeah, thanks for that summary. And I'm sorry, I should have started with Shalom as a warmer welcome.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. Yeah, that's fascinating. We're definitely going to get into that transition from the army into world of mobile games. But before we get into that, I'd love to know, what are you playing right now?
So, as I said, I just joined the new company, so I'm playing a lot of Merge Dragons, which is our biggest game, which is one of the bigger franchises, I would say, in gaming, and we're trying to make it even bigger as it grows. So, playing a lot of that. I think one reason that it's very interesting for me is that it's clearly one of the deepest games that I've worked on, or if not the deepest. And I think that only once you actually start spending time in digging into it, you understand what's the depth capacity in it. So that definitely takes a lot of my gaming time. Other than that, I'm playing some of the similar games in the category, like Travel Town. Yeah, some what's the name of this game? Match Factory, which I also like. Very good game. And another one that is a bit more indie, I would say, not indie, but it's on the smaller side, but I have a warm place in my heart too, because I actually love this game. So it's a traffic game, but with a farm concept. It's called Farm Jam. So they are like doing a take on the jam trend and on farm animals. Has a very fun vibe to it, and it's a very casual, easy puzzle to play, but it has some physics aspects to it which I enjoy playing.
That's really cool. I haven't actually heard of that last one, Farm Jam. Yeah, I'll make a note of that. Yeah, I have to say, big fan of Gram Games over in London. Obviously, they make Merge Dragons, and so great studio, and congrats on the new job as well. So really pleased for you. I hope it's going well. So far, so good.
Yeah.
That's great. So going back to this start in the military, so 6.5 years, something like that, in the Israeli military, and then you move over into the world of games. So how did you get into the games industry? And I guess the follow-on second question would be, well, then you've stayed in the games industry now for a long time. So why are you still in games?
So let's start from the end. I'm not a gamer. I'm not. If I choose what to do in my own free time, gaming would probably be the 10th item on the list. So when I play today, I play out of curiosity to my profession, and this is a big reason of why I'm still in the industry. Jumping backwards, to me, I think the first ever interaction with gaming was, as I said, with Playtika. Playtika has a very rigorous kind of hiring process. They really give you a very big kind of wide topic, 0 to 100 as fast as you can, and then present it to very senior people as if you just know what you're talking about. And this process made it very interesting to me. But what I found out during the process was that despite I don't really get gaming as, let's say, as a leisure activity, like it's not something that I do in my leisure time, I do understand that it's a very data-oriented industry. And ultimately, there's a lot about people, there's a lot about psychology, and there's a lot about where people meet data. And I always say that when I'm being asked this question because I truly believe in it. And I think that this is what kept me in the industry so far. I think that this is what I was pretty much doing when I was in the intelligence corps in the army. It's about people, it's about data, and combining the two things together. So this is why I actually see it as an almost direct continuation of what I've done. But honestly, I think that what kept me in the industry is also people in the industry, which are so diversified. You have people like me who are not gamers, people that are hardcore gamers, and everybody's opinion counts because people really look at things from very different perspectives. And I think that this is what makes this industry so fun to work in, and especially like so international as well.
Yeah, I love that, because I often say that you don't need to be a gamer to succeed in the games industry. You just need to have this real intellectual curiosity for the craft itself and the energy and the passion and drive to really learn and succeed. So it's a really good example of that. What advantages and perhaps disadvantages as well did you have coming from the military into games? I'm intrigued to know what that ramp up was like initially.
That's a good question. I think one advantage is just like, so obviously people who were in intelligence corps or in any intelligence unit in Israel are usually more successful in business than a lot of other people. So there's this conception that if you were there, you're probably smart. So I'm not testifying in any way that I'm smart. All I'm saying is that I was given the privilege of being smart. And given the privilege of, the assumption that some companies have is this is the most rigorous recruiting process in the army. So you've already gone through one. It probably means that you are like good enough to make it through any other process and that you can learn things quickly. What I've done in the army was actually very diverse, but at the end of the day, if you look at the equivalents around the world of what people do in the Israeli army at the age of 18 is very much equivalent to what people in other armies do when they are in their 30s or 40s, and usually takes 3 or 4 times more. So I think that a lot of that mentality is into taking someone young and really shape them into like this very data-driven, like factual kind of like machine that allows you to learn to just be an absolute sponge and then to basically perform, because you have this very limited kind of like years to serve. So you know that like you're basically on a timeline. And I think that this puts you in a very different mentality to someone who's in the market or for a while, or someone who's spent like a lot of years in school, and then you're going out to the real world and it takes you time to adjust. So I think that's definitely one. I think some disadvantages are definitely just really going from a very kind of like moral, like security, kind of like important task into going to doing entertainment, which takes a very big adjustment to understand what is entertainment value, why what we're doing is actually good, what ties entertainment to revenue, because at the end of the day, all companies are revenue driven, which is something you never think of when you're in the army. So a lot of things like this, but I think that it's really, it's really about who could deal with a complex issue, how to break it down, etc. That gives a very strong advantage for people that are coming from this kind of backgrounds.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because that point there you're saying about, obviously in the army, you're not thinking about generating revenue, yet one of your specializations in your career is monetization, right? What a transition. So thanks so much for that. The story on your early career. I guess fast forwarding, you've been in leadership positions now at some of the top mobile games companies in the world. So Playtika, Voodoo, Tripledot, and now Zynga. What are the common traits of top talent in the games industry, and how can you spot them?
So we can spend the next hour talking about it, so I'll try to distill it. Obviously, I think in different positions, different levels, the traits would sometimes change. I'll try to really focus on the things that are consistent. I think that something that I always say is that there's a very important balance in gaming company between relying on data and between having intuition or having a creative sense. And I think that in order to really make it in the industry, obviously you can't just go full on creative because then you'll run out of money. And you can't go full on data because then your games would not be fun. And some companies do that for some time, but then they get stuck. But I think that if you want to be able to grow in a company, you have to demonstrate that you can control the two very well. And sometimes to listen to the data, but sometimes listen to the player, listen to your intuition, and know where to draw a line. And I think that one of the questions that I would ask a company that I would go and interview at would be, what is this balance like? Like, how much do you actually rely on data versus how much do you rely on user feedback? How much you rely on other inputs that you get that are not necessarily 100% measurable, but feed into decision making. So I think that's one. I think that obviously people in the industry are smart because this industry is really highly skewed towards the data side, like we just said. But I think that one of the traits in this industry is really being able to apply intelligence into what you see. Now, I think that you'd see companies that are on a different side of the scale when it comes down to how data-driven they are, how much they are taking data-based decisions, etc., how much they build a roadmap according to data. Really think about it a lot. But at the end of the day, it's important to have an alley which allows you to really say, this is why I started this company, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is why we're different than the rest. Instead of saying, oh, they're doing well because they're doing this, let's do this. And I think that, like, especially now where the gaming industry is at, you'd see a lot of these kind of like hybrids happening in the market. And sometimes you look at this company and you're saying to yourself, wait, like, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to be good at? And I think that being in a company and really have this constant sense of awareness that say, do I actually do something that I believe in? Or am I like getting a bit far off from where I started, is a very important kind of checkpoint that sometimes is like getting lost in some organizations. And I think that it's a very important thing as an individual who works in gaming to always ask yourself, where have you started? Because it's very easy to take a wrong turn and just go down a rabbit hole. I think I can talk about it for a long time, but these are two important things. And the other thing is really, I think, is just very general, but it's just being open and soaking stuff from people that are around you. Like I said before, it's a very international kind of like industry. There's a lot going on. People are coming to it from very different perspectives. It's very easy to come to this industry either from the outside or from within the industry and say, oh, that's what I know. This is what works best. But the reality is that nobody owns the truth, and once you have these good conversations, once you feed data into it, once you feed user feedback into it, and once you really evaluate it properly, you can actually make substantial advancements.
Great. So I'm going to summarize these 3 points that you gave out there. So that first one like I said, this balance of data and creative. And as someone who's thinking of joining a company, asking what that balance is and how importantly, like how do they pull data in? You would assume like a game studio, they're going to have a lot of creative people in there. The creative is constantly trying to push against the data and the analytics. So, but anyway, assumptions aside, trying to figure out what that balance is and do they take data and analytics seriously? One side comment on this, most of my career in games has been from the PC console side. And so it's really for the last year that I've been heavily in the world of mobile gaming, and the contrast between the use of data and analytics and the whole mindset around that and using that for fast iteration and all of that piece is fascinating to see, to the point that I think of mobile games and PC console games as two different industries with different with different skill sets. Just on that point really quickly, would you agree when it comes to use of data and analytics?
Absolutely. I was recently mentoring this AAA PC kind of like game, like platform game studio out of Poland. And they taught me a lot about how different it is, because I was really in mobile. I was doing some other kind of like projects on different kind of like angles of the business, but this was for me the harshest one where I saw the difference. And I think that you can apply a lot of things from mobile into that industry, but you can apply much less things coming from platforms into mobile. And I think that this is the interesting part. And maybe it means that also we'll see more mobile people in the future joining these kind of companies. I think like our company is one, Zynga and Take-Two are a very good example of this split. And I think that there's a lot to learn from the both sides. I think that obviously, because also platforms or like consoles are sometimes very heavy on the IP side of things, it just makes it a completely different business. The monetization is different. And I see that the two areas are coming closer together. But I think that the mobile business is definitely on a highway when it comes down to the amount of things that are happening, the speed in which you just get data back, how fast you can confirm or deny assumptions. Yeah, I think it's just a very exciting place to be in.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And sorry, I got started on summarizing your fantastic lessons on talent, and we got into that tangent, but I couldn't resist. So going back to that summary, you mentioned about balance of data and creative, both in assessing a company and, well, these are, if you're hiring someone or the type of people you want to be around in that team. So balance of data and creative is one. The second, you mentioned about knowing where you've started and knowing where you're going. I guess I'd summarize that as being really clear on mission, perhaps. So without that sort of, people call it like North Star, that guiding North Star, if you don't have that from a creative point of view and a real clear vision on what you're trying to create, it's incredibly easy to get lost and be stuck in this never-ending iteration cycle. So having really, really clear vision and purpose, I think, is key. And that third one was being open and humble. We've just been talking about data and analytics, and there's nothing more humbling than having an assumption and seeing it being proved absolutely wrong in the numbers right there in front of you. And so you always have to be open to that. Is that a good summary of those 3 points there?
Great summary.
Yeah, fantastic. Following on this talent advice, I was just curious, what advice do you have on crafting high-performing teams? We've got some of the traits you're looking for, but is there anything else you would add when you are really being purposeful about building teams?
So I think there's a couple of things to it. I think, first of all, surround yourself with people that are as different as possible to you, but also that have something common with you. I think it makes it so much fun to find mutual points of connection, but then also have people with different opinions, like we said before. I think the other thing is that motivation really outweighs experience. I think I'm a good example of someone who got into this industry, found himself in a place that he knows nothing about, and yet I was given a very quick 2 to 3 day task. Do this, and I did it. And I remember it until today that I managed to pull it off, although I was like shaking for just the thought of showing it to someone. And I think that like I got so far, so I guess it was good. And I think one last thing is really make sure that you go into a place that you can grow in. It's not enough to just be around the right people, but make sure that you can join a place that you believe in, that you want to stay there for a while, that you want to learn. It's true for every industry, but I think that in gaming, sometimes beggars can't be choosers. Sometimes there's just reality. And like we've seen in the last 2 years that the reality could be harsh. But I think that it's important to really find this place where you can express yourself, find this role that makes sense for you, and somewhere that you can actually grow and develop. The reason for that is that it just takes time in gaming to settle down. It takes time to figure out stuff. And you really want to enjoy this work. A lot of people started working in gaming because they wanted to enjoy it. And usually the first year, you mostly can't get to this point where you're absolutely just having blast because you're just learning so much. And I think that it's just good to pick properly, give it a chance, spend this time, and really have a good fun time as you are making another game great.
Fantastic. Thanks again. You've given me three. We've keep neatly tying these up with 3 lessons. Before I get into that though, that last point though about you may get into the games industry because you love games, and then you get in there and you figure out it's really hard, and you have to really put in the time and the effort till you can get to the point where you're thoroughly enjoying the output. The analogy I often give to that is that you may love eating food, right? But would you love like planting the crops, reaping them, and then going and cooking the food, and then creating a restaurant, and then serving that food to someone? It's like big difference between that whole process and eating food. So that's my analogy. Whether it holds up or not is another question. But right, let's summarize these 3 points here. So your first one: surround yourself with diverse people. And a key thing you mentioned in there, summarize that as common values. So surround yourself with diverse people, but they have same values. And I definitely want to dive into this in a moment as well, because it's like, yes, many different types of brains and different types of people come up with different solutions, but you've got to be unified under something. So that's number one. The second is motivation outweighs experience. The last one, make sure there's room to grow. So I guess the question was from the perspective of crafting high-performing teams. Make sure that there is room for those people and that team to grow into, and there's plenty of learning. So you want to catch people just at the bottom of that learning curve, so they flourish, and that team has a chance to be highly successful. Going back to that first one then, surrounding yourself with diverse people with common values. I'd love to hear your take on this, because you came from Israel and you've moved to UK and you've worked in many international companies. How does that happen? And perhaps has there been any learning from mistakes here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that in some of the cases, I was drawn to the most Israeli companies you can think of. And in some of the cases, I was drawn to the most remote. And to be honest, one of the reasons that I was even curious about moving out of Israel and really like going and like walking somewhere else, it wasn't about like the location. It was just I want to go and be surrounded by people from a different culture, is because obviously when you just do the one thing, when you live in a place, you have these habits that you don't pay attention to. It's like how you speak, how loud you speak, how quiet you speak. Like these things, very big differentiators between cultures. And for some people, someone who is speaking very softly and quietly could be more intimidating than someone who shouts. In some environments, if you shout, this is the only way you're going to get hurt. So you're kind of like it's a big adjustment. And I think that for me, at least, I had quite a cultural shock when I first moved. And then I realized, oh, this is a completely different thing, because it was the first time that I really encountered what's a different environment, let alone that it's an environment where people speak English and French, and all of a sudden you have office discussions that are not just in your native tongue, but in a tongue that you don't understand. And you need to basically blend in socially, you need to blend in managerially, and there are expectations that things would work. And I think that for me, I wouldn't say that it's 100% a mistake, but sometimes it's very easy to just say, yeah, I know what to do. This is how we did it there. This is the way we did it. Let's do it here. Copy paste. It's working. And it's not the case. And sometimes I think you realize that you never really you can never really jump on a moving car in that sense. And like I said before, it takes time. Not only that it takes time to blend into a new place and to learn it and to start like ripening the fruit, but it's also the fact that like you need to change, adjust, soak in, and figure out how you can make an impact, and how to make an impact from the bottom up rather than the top down. Especially like sometimes if you are being parachuted by one organization to another as this guy knows his stuff, this guy has experience, this guy worked in quote unquote HQ before, now he knows best. Sometimes it's not necessarily the recipe for success. So I wouldn't say that I got heavily burnt, but I definitely had some shaping experiences around that. So I think it's a very important area to be sensitive around.
Yeah, thanks for opening up about that. Do you have any little, let's call it life hacks or tips or little bits of really actionable advice for someone in that situation? They've just started a new job, they've just joined a new team, and they are aware that they need to settle into the culture before they can start making change. Are there any little habits that you've picked up when you're in that scenario yourself?
Yeah, I think that people really want to see that you are trying to be a part of the team, that you are putting down the effort, that you care about the team, not just from a professional perspective, but also a social perspective. And obviously, like, if you move between countries, it's even worse because you need to like learn how to deal with very different things. And if you move to Canada, you need to learn how to deal with winter. So I think that like it's important to separate sometimes the personal from the professional, but also use the personal to create a bridge that would help people to want to integrate you into an organization. And I think that it kind of like talks about the original question. And I think that like you would always never find people that have the exact same hobbies or live in the same neighborhood as you. But there is something, and people in gaming are usually very sharing and open. And I think that it's important to create these interactions, whether on the lunch table or over a beer after work, and start creating these connections, but also say, I had a really bad day or month at work, but I'm not going to take it home with me. But I also moved to a new place. I'm not going to take whatever I got from home to work today because people would see it. And in Canada, I always had this motto that I try to live. Well, I know that I'm currently like, it's extreme first world problem. But I try to live within a walking distance from my workplace. I found that my ideal time is 15 minutes of walk. It gives you enough clearance to really clear your head.
There was so many good nuggets of advice in there, from taking that, not bringing your ego into work and having that, I guess, compartmentalization between work and home, being social just for the sake of like, I guess, building trust and getting to know everyone. And yeah, if you're going to move to Montreal, you need to know how to survive those minus 40 degrees Celsius winters. Yeah, if you're going to spend any amount of time there, that's great. Thanks, Ido. Hey, we're coming up to the end of this podcast episode. And so I have one last question for you, and that's, what's your favorite interview question?
That's a good one, and it's something that I spent a lot of hours of crafting. But I recruited, I think, for at least 10 different positions during my career. And there's one question that I really like because I think that it's quite applicable for a wide array of positions, and yet it doesn't have an answer. Okay. I got asked this question over my first interview in the industry, and I'm trying to replicate it, yet every time it's in a different format. So the question is a Fermi question. So basically, it's a question that is basically asking you to quantify something based on just pure logic. So it allows you to see how someone thinks. And basically, you ask them to explain to you how they get the answer in front of you. Obviously, they can't Google it or use ChatGPT. So the question could be something like, how many commercial flights are there taking place in the US every year?
Okay, so you're a big fan of the critical thinking questions, which I've definitely done before, and I did promise you ahead of before we'd recorded, I was like, I'll answer your interview question, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm on the spot asking that. I guess the way that I would probably go out about breaking it down, and I'm probably not going to do the whole thing now, but you start with some sort of high level estimates of numbers. So with how many commercial flights are there in the US, I guess you'd have to figure out initially. Some stats that would be interesting would be population sizes and also frequency between cities and the major cities, and time of day, like how many hours are there in the day, and how many flights could fly, and all these sorts of things. This would probably be the way that I'd go about it, frantically jotting down some very poor math on it. And am I right in saying that you're not looking for the correct answer here? In fact, for someone to give you anywhere near a correct answer on the spot with no data is probably really unlikely. But you're looking for, like you said, the logic and how they figure out something like that, or at least how they go about solving problems on the spot like that. Is that kind of what you're aiming for with these types of critical thinking questions?
So one important thing, I always know the answer so I can tell them at the end, because otherwise they just want to finish the interview just to run to Google and check it. So I always know the answer. And again, every time I would ask it in a different way, so nobody could say, oh, this interviewer asked me this question. But I think that what I'm really curious of is to see if they ask me questions. Yeah. So I want to hear clarification questions, because that's the most important thing. I want to see that they really try to break it down, but if they hit a mental block, they would try to clarify. They would say, okay, I assume that this, and this, just like you did, but it's also okay to ask questions. And I think that this is something people don't do often enough, is to clarify what is the bottom line you're trying to get to, instead of assuming what is the bottom line you're trying to get to. And with such a generic, general kind of like high level, high picture, big picture question, it's a good kind of like stage to let someone either make a big mistake or give you a very different good impression versus like very hard time that they might have had in the first part of the interview.
Yeah, and that's good interview advice in general. Like, you can always tell when a candidate is very confident because they're more relaxed, and you've given them a question and they come back to you, just be like, okay, my assumption is this, is that correct? Or here, like, can you just, like I said, clarify and like just reveal the layers before they just, I think, a more inexperienced or perhaps candidate that's not as confident would dive straight in with the task. And again, that is not what you want them to be doing in the job either. You want them to be intellectually curious and pushing back and ensuring that their time is used efficiently. So, cool. Yeah, thanks for that, Ido. Well, hey, we have come to the end. You gave so many great, I said nuggets there of advice, so many great pieces of advice that you're right. We could have spent another hour on these things, even the ones around surrounding yourself by diverse people, or that balance between data and creative, and how you figure that out from companies and individuals. So many good points in there. And I loved hearing about your whole career journey as well. So thank you for that, Ido. Wishing you the best of luck in this new position too. And thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Joe.